And welcome back to another episode of Lay It on the Table, the Southern based board game podcast with the accent on Southern. I believe I got it right that time. Holy
There it
cow.
is.
I am
Yes.
your host, one of your hosts, Joe Mahaffey. Good morning and welcome. Our other host is.
I'm James Engelhardt. Good morning, everybody. It's a lovely morning here in mid-October. Brisk, beautiful, not brisk for my Yankee friends, but
All right. Well, we have another treat this week. You know, we've I know it's usually you get James and I, but these last few weeks we've been inviting people to join us. So today, our guest is Miss Christina Styles, author, game publisher, and we're absolutely happy to have her. We will say though, before we get started, for those of you who do consume this on YouTube, her camera was not working this morning, so I have put her Facebook picture over here, which is why you see the lovely Medusa piece on the video. But with that said, welcome, Christina.
Good morning. Thank you, guys.
So this is unusual because usually on this show, I get to do a lot of talking, a lot of question asking, and I just stumble over James all the time. Um, but what's interesting about where you come from, Christina, and where James comes is that y'all have a lot of symmetry. So why don't we kind of start there? Why don't you tell us? Well, I guess the way I like to think about it is when James and I first started doing this, the very first episode, we sort of told our origin story. And I would love for you to share with your origin story in terms of how did you get into games, how did you get into publishing, and all the things that you're doing. So we'll kind of
Okay,
pivot off of that if that makes sense.
that's fine. And my story actually converges with Professor Dungeon Master from Dungeon Craft,
Love it.
who's going to be at Jeff Con if there's locals on here that are going to the North Carolina convention. So I was reading Dungeon Magazine back in the day. I was a young girl that whose brother convinced her that he needed somebody to torture into playing Dungeons and Dragons, and as the youngest, child, I was forced into it. But I ended up loving it, and I decided I wanted to write some adventures. And Dan at the time and his buddy Raphael had published "Is There an Elf in the House?" It was one of the early dungeon magazines, and they wrote their address in there. So I started writing them and conversing with them, and little by little, Dan and I decided we were going to team up and write an adventure together. So my first publication was Jigsaw with Dan, and that was, I believe it was issue 61. Tony DiTerlizzi, who's a very popular artist, did the actual cover for that of our character, who's a Frankenstein-like character.
And for the uninitiated, Dragon Magazine was a magazine that was published in concert with Dungeons and Dragons. It really started back during the TSR days and evolved through
Mm-hmm.
many years. And in recent years, it's been a digital publication, and I believe it's most recently been I don't want to say shut down. I really think it's just been transitioned into D&D Beyond as Wizards of the Coast sort of
Yeah,
solidify
probably
all that.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you can still get copies digitally and find them around. So I just wanted to kind of help everybody understand what that was.
Yes, so that was TSR days, and they were about to transition because they were being sold. So we went through a lot of editors, and interestingly enough, that's where I initially started talking to Wolfgang Bauer, who owns Kobold Press, and Dave Gross was one of the editors. So he's done a lot of publications of novels and such, and is a game designer as well. But it was like a long empty time in between there until I started following Eden Studios online, and the OGL opened up in 2000. So Dungeons and Dragons third edition became open source, and people started wanting to produce things. So I was on a lot of forums, and I got to working with Eden Studios, Atlas Games, and started mostly editing at the time before I got back into doing some writing and such. So that's where my career began, really, with the third edition, since it was such a dry spell after the Dungeon Magazine piece. um, yeah, so mostly a freelancer for many years, and then I got to teaching at Winthrop University. It was my actual second stint, and I had been published, had been a publisher, and I decided, to try to convince them that we could do a writing class where this would, engage the students, because a lot of them were very much into fantasy and or playing these games at the time. And I convinced them to run that first class, which was a writing 311, and was writing tabletop RPGs, and that was like
Nice.
spring of 2016. So if you want to start there, or
No, I'm
or
well.
what?
And it's funny. That's kind of really what brought this together. So
Yeah.
just a quick backstory. I was in the game store, gosh, about a month ago. As some of you may have recalled me talking in the previous episode, I was interested in getting back into mini painting, and there were these two women sitting at a table painting beautiful work. And
That was one woman painting beautiful work. That was Linda.
Rob, the owner of our favorite local game store, friendly favorite local game store, introduced me to Christina, and we got to talking, and she was, we were kind of talking about her backstory, and as she was talking about teaching the creative writing class, I'm like, oh my gosh, you have to come on to this podcast and talk to James. So I'm going to let James kind of take it from here because I know.
Yeah, that's so I'm teaching at Furman, and as I have mentioned several times on this podcast, I have a first year writing course. So, that sort of first, freshman writing kind of thing. Okay. And we're doing tabletop games as our sort of focus. The things that they're writing about are tabletop games. And so they're not writing rules. They're more, doing rhetorical analysis, like, looking at a board game or I have one of my students is super deep into Warhammer, speaking of miniatures.
Oh, yeah. I had several of those in my class.
Yeah. Yep. So, but looking at these objects and, doing that sort of thing, and just the other stuff that you would do is in a first year writing class, but just focusing on tabletop games as the.
Okay, that's interesting. So our curriculum is spelled out pretty much, where we have a certain 101, so you have to teach certain things. And I did teach 101 for a while, but I tended to like to deal with sophomores who had already found their way. So we have at Winthrop, they have another course that you have to take called critical thinking. And we got rid of our second writing class and it became critical thinking. So I started teaching more of that, and I added in some philosophy because I was actually a philosophy major.
As was I. Huzzah!
Yeah, huzzah! Yeah, that's awesome. Philosophy and religious studies is my undergraduate degree from Winthrop, and I went and got their Master's of Liberal Arts, and I have 21 hours in English and writing, so I was able to teach at the college level. So, but I incorporated that into the critical thinking into, like you're talking about, analyzing games. In a later class I did for the medieval studies department, where I had the students actually write medieval games, and we played several of them, and they had to write a paper on analyzing the games. Some of them, they could choose one of them, and they had to analyze it as per the Learning to Think Things Through guide that Gerald Nozick, that's who we used. That was our main author. So we had a list of questions that they had to go through and answer in response to those things, and basically detail how it fit within that range and what their thoughts were about it. So I was able to combine both.
So you were getting them to play like the TOEFL games and early versions of chess and that sort of thing, or?
No, the games that had a medieval theme. So I should, explain that. So it was actually taught as a medieval studies class and a writing course. And at the time, I was actually a history student as well. I was going on to get a second master's in history. So I convinced the medieval studies department to let me teach a class about, games with medieval themes, and the students would create their own game. That was another thing they had to do in the course.
Very cool.
Yeah, so they were analyzing games, they were creating their own game, and they had to reach out to a developer and interview them, and ask them questions. So that was the hardest part of the class, actually, to get the students to actually reach out to developers, whom I found for them. It's not like that. It's not like they had to go search them down or anything. But that was kind of interesting. But it was a great class. It was fun. Some of the ideas they came up with.
And was that were those sort of medieval board games, RPGs, a bit of both?
There were some RPGs. So one of them was Conan. I remember we played the Modifius Conan at one point, and my students were running the games as well. And sometimes I would bring in one of my fellow staff members that I used to work with when I was in IT at Winthrop. He came in and ran some stuff in Savage Worlds at some point. I can't remember if it was for that class or another class, but we played like Shadows over Camelot, Dominion, the Sheriff of Nottingham game. Things like that. So and they could recommend something if they had something that fit within the parameters, that they could bring in and play as well. So we did a lot of game playing, so I'm sure they enjoyed that part of the class.
That's super fun. And I'm kind of so one of the things I think is funny is telling my students this too, like most of these game companies are really pretty small.
Oh, they
And
are.
yeah, and if you want to talk to the president of the company, it's probably that person answering the phones a lot of times. So
It can be, yeah, most
yeah.
definitely. And it's a small community.
Hmm.
So like if you get a bad name at some point, then it gets around because it is a small community.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
perfect sense. So one of the
yeah.
things that I have the students doing, they're doing this lit review right now, and they'll have an argument. They've got
Hmm.
like these 4 tracks that they're sort of paying attention in for, like cultural. It's kind of a cultural studies thing, right? But
Oh,
they're
nice.
writing with games.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that they're doing, like accessibility, socialization,
Hmm.
education, and representation.
Hmm.
And so I was looking and I was seeing your Medusa's Guide for Gamer Girls.
Yes.
And so I was thinking, well, that would be the super fun thing, because there's a whole lot of trouble with representation in gaming with that.
Yes, we actually did a panel at Paizo one year when I was at PaizoCon. Several of the ladies who, one of them, well, actually two of them actually work for Wizards of the Coast now, but there were just several of us
Nice.
talking about that. But just our intro into writing for games. We were some of the few women in the industry at the time. Um, so yeah, we talked about that and the art, how it's sometimes off-putting to women. You know, um,
Mm-hmm.
for me, if you're going to give me some beefcake and the woman, then that's fine. I like Boris Vallejo type of art. Or,
There you go.
there just needs to be some balance if you're going to have that. So, um, but yeah, we did a presentation on that. Really went over well, and I've always been someone who's tried to encourage women, you know, uh, gays, trans people to get
Mhm.
involved in the hobby. Get your voices out there. It doesn't take much, and even if somebody is not interested in publishing what you're writing, you can always become a publisher. So
Yeah.
it's the bar to that is low these days with like drive-through RPG. So
Yes.
Well, if I recall from our conversation, some of the work that you did at Winthrop with the students actually ended up on RPG drive-through. Is that correct?
yes, I do want to say that.
Cool.
So yeah, I had a grand plan at the time that what we were doing that first semester would actually become a small book about 64 pages, electronic book only. That was the plan. Of course, it is out there. It's Ravensburg, and it's under Christina Styles Presents on Drive Through
Yeah.
RPG. All right, so that was the original class, and I talk about the original projects that I had them do. And I ran it like some of the early Kobold Press. They used to have like a contest where people would pitch ideas, and the people would vote on the ideas who bought in as a patron type thing. So that's how the student Justin Smith ended up becoming the lead designer of the adventure. And Justin and I still are in contact. Justin is doing some projects for Christina Styles Presents now. He's just
Cool.
he's waiting on me to learn how to use InDesign very well. But that's my next plan. So because one of the things about self-publishing is the cost of doing layout, that can hurt your budget. So I'm trying to learn it myself. But he's one of my students who actually went on to do some other material because I have it in my possession at least. But one of my other students from a different class, AJ Todd, went out and produced some of his own things. So I was happy to see that they took it beyond my class, some of them.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, but that project is out there. And the initial thing when I put it up for charity is like $10, and we got over $300 initially for the Winthrop English department, one of the scholarship funds. Yeah,
nice.
I think it was for travel and stuff like that, if I recall correctly. Yeah, so it did okay. Yeah, and I'm proud of them. What they did. It was pulling teeth sometimes because it was very collaborative, and there were a lot of fights in class because I set one up. I set Justin up as a lead designer, and other people didn't like that. And they didn't like that he could quash some ideas. And I said, this is how it works in the real world.
Yeah.
When you work for a game company, if you go out and become a freelancer, that the person who gave you the assignment is the one that's going to be able to quash whatever ideas they don't like, and they'll decide what ultimately goes in the book. So we had a clash on theme because some of the students wanted to put a crash spaceship in our horror piece that was not sci-fi. So that caused some rifts in the class, but ultimately I think they did a good job. pulling together in the end. And I don't think they could initially see the size of the project, what I was trying to build at the time, to get the big picture of it. But when it came together and actually, came out as a PDF, and I, gave them copies of it, I see what you're doing. So I think they had that hard time to get that synergy idea together of how this all fits together.
Well, it's interesting to me thinking about this, because if you did this in 2016 and we're now in 2021, 2022, James started, I think, his class in 2021. It's curious to see how people's familiarity with RPGs has evolved in that 6 years. And part of that is we've talked about it before, the Critical Role phenomenon and how that's made it accessible in many ways, but also just the
Stranger Things as well.
Stranger Things, absolutely. And as well as the pandemic, and I think now people coming to gaming of any sorts is different. My wife and I, we spent the week at the beach last week, and I got one of those new Dungeons and Dragons of the Month shirt from Amazon, and I'm walking down Ocean Boulevard, and this guy from an Airbrush t-shirt shop says, "Hey man, do you want a t-shirt?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "Man, I really like yours." but it's just showing, but my point is, it's just sort of showing just how broad and wide it's become versus 6 years ago. And I wonder if that would be a different experience, because even drive-through RPG has changed dramatically because of the virtual tabletops, etc.
Exactly. Most definitely. One of the things I think about is, we talk about 2016 to now. Just think, when I was growing up in gaming, it was the 80s satanic panic times.
Yep.
So we were dealing with that, just the bad image that the media had of the game. And, my mom would always get asked about, well, your kids are playing Dungeons and Dragons, that demonic game. And she's like, well, they're at my kitchen table. I know they're not out, getting drunk or, driving around or getting pregnant, whatever.
Yep.
So at least I know where they are,
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think we're roughly the same age, and my parents were sort of a little bit different because they were evangelical Christians, still are, and so we were not allowed to play D&D. That was off the table.
Okay.
But my dad was a social worker and was used to role play as a therapy, right? Modality. And so we could play, let's see, we got Champions, we got Traveler, played Gamma World, things that were still that were still RPGs. He said there's nothing wrong with the role-playing game idea. It was just the D&D thing in particular. So
Gotcha. Yeah. And I guess there's still some issue with that, because Justin, who is a teacher, said he was trying to do a D&D club, and the principal was concerned that it was D&D. So I think he went with War Games. Yeah. So I think he went with War Games. We're talking middle schoolers.
Right.
So I'm waiting to hear about that. But yeah, so there's still that idea that, there's something wrong with D&D.
Yep.
Not to the extent as it had been, but it's still there to some degree.
That's interesting. Yep.
Yeah.
Not entirely surprised. But...
Yeah, well, from my point of view, it's number one, my parents didn't care, so there you go. My parents didn't care. But I've talked about it on this group, on this podcast before, that I've done it with youth groups before, and there's another guy in the store who comes in the store, Zach, who's a teacher, and he started a D&D club at the local middle school. And so I think it is sort of that ebb and flow, because I did have somebody come up to me and say, are you sure that D&D is okay? And I was like, how long have you known me?
So
clearly not okay. That's definitely
fair.
Right.
Fair. So
obviously gamer parents are all for it, because they realize the social skills that children gain. When I was at PaizoCon one year, I actually got to run a game of Fairy's Tale, which was one of the games that I was involved in writing. Green Ronin produced. Yes.
There it is, right there.
So I had a group of 5-year-olds. I was running a game for them of one of the Jack and the Beanstalk adventures.
That's awesome.
So that was glorious, just to see we're all little girls.
Well, the only reason gamer parents have kids is because they ultimately want to play more than 2-player games.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I know if we go to RPG drive-through, we find a lot of Christina Styles Presents. I also notice if I go over to Amazon and put in Christina Styles, I find a lot of anthology books as well as some of your publications. And I'm seeing like Pathfinder and all of these other things. Talk a little bit about that.
I did work for Paizo for a little while, mostly as editing. I did some minor writing. So basically I did most of my, I guess, recent past was working for Kobold Press. Though I did a lot of stuff with Midgard, and I'm an absolute fan of Midgard, and I really appreciate what they do. But when Pathfinder started dying out because of 5e, then I just haven't been in the design mode of writing so much. And then, of course, I ended up going through a divorce. So that kind of put my writing on hold for a while as well.
It does that, yes.
Yes, it tends to do that. So
Yep.
I'm still trying to build back. So I haven't worked for any third-party people in a while. But I did produce some Mutants and Masterminds small volumes that were put out. Love and Justice. There's volume 1 and volume 2. If you look at my Facebook page, they're out there. So we did one as a completely systems neutral piece because it was more like, here's the history of, romance tropes in comic books. And I had to get somebody who was knowledgeable about comic books because I was never a comic book geek. I hate to admit that people might pull my geek card from me.
Okay.
I know there's always something like,
I'm not a video
really got
gamer
into Doctor
either.
Who. I try not to tell anybody, but yeah.
I'm not either. I'm glad you said that. I was like, I looked at that set and I'm like, that's the cheesiest thing I've ever seen. All right, now I'm banned for life, right?
Yeah.
This
me both.
This is a safe space. This is a safe space.
No, I never could get into that. But yeah, so that was my last stuff that I've done, and before that, it was the Book of Passion. So I don't know if you know this, but I produced one of the unexpurgated books for Sex
Nice.
and Path. It was officially OGL 3.75, but people know that to mean Pathfinder. I just couldn't claim compatibility for it. But yeah, that was a project that another publisher brought to my door because they didn't want to be involved with the themes of it, but they were, they liked the idea of it, but they just didn't want to ruin. They didn't want to taint their reputation. So here comes Medusa. Medusa says, "Hey, yeah, I'm willing to take a chance on this," and it's really done pretty well. And I got Misfit to actually publish it through them. So I'm like, I'm a publisher and a small studio. So sometimes I do my productions through Misfit Studios, which is a company out of Canada. So he's got a bigger audience, obviously, than I do, and especially with the Mutants and Masterminds things. That's what his company is mostly known for. When I did Love and Justice. So those are some love themes that I've been involved in for the last couple of years. And I do have a Book of Passion bestiary that I need to get off my butt and finish editing. I've got all the artwork for it.
That would be something.
Yeah, yes. Like I said, it's been a struggle to get my life back in order. I left teaching when the marriage broke down, and little by little, I found my way into doing called what is a functional analyst. I do computer stuff and make sure the files work the way they're supposed to, and do a lot of financial analysis type stuff. So yeah, I've always been one of those left brain, right brain people, and I have liberal arts degrees, but I work in the tech field.
Yep.
Hey! You're saying that like it's a bad thing.
No. I'm just saying people think it's weird, and I had a hard time with getting a job in the tech field with the liberal arts degrees because of those nasty algorithms,
Yeah, but now they know that the liberal arts people know stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I'm really enjoying that. It's a good company I work for and all. So, I'm happy doing that. More so than teaching. I always thought myself a better mentor than an actual teacher. So I have been mentoring mostly, like I said, I still keep in touch with some of my students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome.
So I'm curious.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious about something you said a moment ago.
Mm-hmm.
You said that you were doing a lot with Pathfinder until, and you didn't say it this way, but you basically said 5e came in and sucked all the air out of the room.
It did. And I play 5e, but I'm not a super fan of 5e. I'll just put that out there.
and that's okay. It was just kind of interesting to me because I was, I've heard, in the digital world where the content platforms, think the YouTubes and the Facebooks and the TikToks, etc., they kind of thin the herd to the influencers that they want,
right,
to really amplify because it's a money thing. And as we've watched, Hasbro get more profit out of Wizards of the Coast and make it more of a centerpiece of their portfolio, I have wondered about the third party content creators in that vehicle, because even if you look at, and we talked about Critical Role a second ago, they overcame it by becoming so popular. Wizards of the Coast wanted to publish with them.
Yes.
Okay, that's not going to happen for anybody else.
I doubt it. I truly doubt it.
I mean, barring a surprise. So then it's
right.
So do you find that today just the, hey, I'm going to write my own homebrew, or I'm going to do an RPG 3, and like I back DM Dave, who publishes his own content, and he's got a massive following.
Okay.
So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are about the future of this kind of open source publishing.
Well, obviously they're going to this one D&D, and there's the question of, is it really compatible and all that kind of stuff. So I recall the day when, the 3.5 was ending and they were doing 4th edition, and 4th edition was like not very nice on the open gaming part, and people didn't know what the license was actually going to look like. So that's when you had people start creating their own game systems, like Goodman Games, did the DCC, Dungeon Crawl Classics, and went their own way, so to speak. But though they did a few products for 4th edition, but everybody else was like, we don't know where this is going, and we don't seem to have any control. So they kind of abandoned it, and then 4th didn't really do well. For other reasons, but we won't go into that. I wasn't a fan, but so when 5e came around and it opened it up things to a certain degree. I mean, the OGL is not as the SRD, I should say, Systems Reference Document, is not as open as the 3rd edition stuff was. I mean, you can't use certain classes, all the information from them and all that from what I've seen, and I haven't investigated tremendously. But 3rd edition was pretty much, wide open. That's Pathfinder stuff is on the web, the Die-20 PFSRD. If you go out and look at that, it pretty much has anything that was open from the company. So I like that era, and that was the era that I really got involved in gaming. And I, as a programmer type person, the linearity, if I can say that right, of Pathfinder 1 really, it spoke to me. I like that you can build stuff on top of things, and it makes sense. There's a process, and I look at 5e and I'm like, y'all just kind of threw some stuff together here. It doesn't make sense to me. And the fact that the player characters have just become so powerful, it's a lot of times it's just a cakewalk through the game for them, so that aspect of it, and it doesn't call to me as a designer. It really doesn't. So I've had that issue with it. That as a fantasy designer, I should say, some aspects I could see doing another game with it, and I think some people are starting to do some of that. So I think it might spin out in that regard. I'm not sure that this one D&D is going to move things where people want it to go. It seems to be very much tied into the virtual world, and there's still that aspect of folks that want to do the meet together and play, and they don't have to get online and do all their tools. So I think they're going to lose that part of the market, because I do play online occasionally, but it's not my, end all be all for my game. So I want to meet in person, and I don't need all the gadgets and stuff to do that.
I'm feeling a little indicted here. So
no, I do play with a group down in towards Charleston online through Roll20, but it's just my preferred way to game is actually meet in person. It's so much more fun.
100%. And I think too, what's interesting too is that, well, first of all, I think it's going to be interesting to see how 1D&D evolves. I don't think it's going to be the one ring to rule them all. Mainly because I think watching at what they're doing with D&D Beyond and still looking how Roll20 is evolving, and there's others like Fantasy Grounds, etc., that there's enough of a market there. I think there's always going to be that rogue. I am playing this game because I get to sit down with my friends and we all become collective content creators. I say that I start off a story as a DM and say, this is North. And
absolutely,
James steps in and says, I don't like going north. I want to go west. And now all of a sudden, crap, I got to figure out what they're going to do when they go west. I mean, and that's the beauty of it. Your collective storytelling, which is, we go back to that anthropological view of we all sit around the fire and tell these stories. That's kind of what we're doing.
Absolutely. And that's the main reason I like to run games at conventions. So I'm naturally an introverted person. And to get out of some of my shyness, I decided one year to run games at Con Carolina, and it just kind of went from there. So I try to run stuff. And when I was doing the Beyond the Ghostlight Reef for Kobold Press, that was one of my adventures for them. I would actually go out to different conventions and run that, and just the strangeness that would happen at each table. It was wonderful.
Awesome.
No story ever went the same. It was just amazing. So I love that aspect of it. And that's probably why I really didn't become a novelist, because early in my years, I thought I'm going to be, a novelist, a fiction writer. I've written some fiction that's been published, but it's not my end all be all in types of writing. I do tend towards more, as I call game writing, is the fictional nonfiction. So, so that's where I'm at with that. But, yeah.
So, in speaking about these kind of OGLs and this sort of open space, I was looking, and you seem to might still be doing a lot with like the Mutants and Masterminds sort of engine and sets, including like Rogue Mage is part of it.
It is the second edition. Yeah.
Okay. And so is that what draws you to that? Just sort of more open rule sets, or?
I'm very interested in more open rule sets. With Mutants and Masterminds, I just got to put out there, I'm a big fan of Steve Kenson's. So I think that he has done some great rule sets over the years, and True 20, Mutants and Masterminds are obvious, samples of that, or examples. So I love it. I don't play a lot of it. I usually only get to play Mutants and Masterminds when I go to Oklahoma to see some friends down there and go to SoonerCon. Because that's one of their house games. But I love the work that Steve Kenson has done, and I really appreciate it, and dove into it as a designer. So I still plan on doing stuff for Mutants and Masterminds. I am planning possibly I've taken some of the D&D 5e rules and doing something with Rogue Mage with that, but like I said, I'm not a true fan of 5e, so it would just be because more people are familiar with it that I would go that route. And the Rogue Mage stuff still sells. It's been somewhat of an evergreen product out there. The concept is really cool. So and I would actually.
Is there more fiction coming out with it as well? Is that kind of helping it, or?
I don't think so. I think Faith Hunter put out the anthologies, of which I was a part, and I don't think the sales were there that she expected, but so I don't think the people she works with wanted to pick up any more fiction. So it would be a matter of if she decided to do it with her own publishing company at some point. But people still have a great fondness for Rogue Mage novels. When I was out in SoonerCon this past year in June, one of the ladies who was sitting beside me on a panel was actually, "Oh, I love those books," and she saw that I had a copy of the game, but she said, "I need to get that." So I told her where she could buy it from and all. But yeah, people still have a fondness for it.
Now, you were talking about cons a minute ago, and last time James and I were together, we had an opportunity to speak with Richard Fortuna about Jeff Con and upcoming MythCon. Are you going to be involved in either of those?
I'm not, other than somebody who's participating in just showing up at the con and running stuff and playing. I'm not so much into the organizational part of it. That's not my cup of tea.
Have you signed up to run some games already?
I'm running Shadow of the Demon Lord at Jeff Con twice.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm playing in a couple of games, so I'll get to see some of the people that I used to play a lot of Savage Worlds games with. So I am a big Savage Worlds fan as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. So, James, do you have any? Before I go on to the next phase, I want to make sure I don't talk over your next question like I did last time.
No, that's good. We can keep on trucking.
Yeah, so one of the things that we like to do, Christina, is we like to talk about board games that we are currently playing, and we call it a segment called "What's on Our Table." Okay. I can go first to kind of show you how it operates, and then you can kind of tell us what's going on in your world. So, I was at the beach for a week with my two children who were in their 20s, but my wife's cousin's two children joined us for half the time. So I had some, as we say, littles. It was a 9-year-old and 11-year-old. So the first thing we did was we played Wizard Kittens with them because we had learned to play it. And we thought they would enjoy it. They didn't like it at all.
Oh, okay.
So we're like, okay,
Oh.
bad idea. Toss that one out. Pulled out Carcassonne because it was easy to teach. Absolutely loved it. They were like, we have to get we have to get a copy of this. So then we had left for the beach on Friday. A package was supposed to arrive at my house on Friday, and it did after we left. So I told my daughter, grab the package, bring it to the beach. Flamecraft.
Oh, nice.
This was a huge hit. We played this so many times, and it was a hit not only with the 11 and 9-year-olds, it was a hit with the 23 and 28-year-olds. In fact, we played it last night here. You may notice this one is still shrink wrapped. I actually have 2 copies. No judgment.
No.
It was one of those situations where I heard about the game, I ordered it, and then I forgot I ordered it, and I ordered it again. But don't worry, I have a place for this. But Flamecraft is a well-balanced game. We've played it several times. The winner doesn't like run away with it. Love the theme, and this is what I really love about it is there's an artist. I have to read this because I'll never remember her name. There's an artist, Sundara Tang, who does a lot of dragon artwork. Well, she was just doing some doodles on her Instagram of these cute little dragons. And Manny Vega, the designer, said, hey, that would be a really cool idea for a game. And so this all came out from Instagram doodles that became a game. So it's available. Awesome. The deluxe version is available from Cardboard Alchemy and Lucky Duck Games. Highly recommend.
Okay.
So that's what's on my table. James?
Laura and I got to Everdell again, and as we keep playing it, it goes faster and faster. So I think we're down to about 45 minutes to an hour with playing a whole game of Everdell. So that's
Everdell, no Pearlbrook, no.
Correct, just base Everdell. So that was nice. And then this is the ways that gaming happens, right? And the ways that someone says, oh, hey, I'm interested in board games. And someone else says, oh, I know a guy. So I got connected, this neighbor, Matt, over by my left shoulder here, works. So many people are engineers in this kind of part of the geek world. And yes,
absolutely.
Yep. So they're working together, but they were out at a gym working out, and somehow they started talking about board games. And my neighbor said, Mike, you should meet this guy, James. And then Mike immediately, I guess, sort of found me on Facebook, messaged me, and invited me to his next game night. So that was this past Thursday, and we played Role Player. Do you know this game?
I've seen it. I've seen it. Yeah. Yeah,
it's kind of it borrows, if it's not exactly a licensed D&D product, it borrows very heavily from D&D. So, and I think it might have some sort of licensing agreement somewhere. But it's dice, right? So hence the role player. Get it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Knee slapper. Hold on. There we go.
And so so we you roll dice, and then you're filling out. It's basically the sort of the way deck builders were. You know what's really fun about playing Magic? Building my deck. And then the play is sort of a secondary thing. So let's just focus on the building of a good deck. So this is the similar kind of thing. Like what's really fun or can be fun about D&D, other role-playing games, is building a character. So you're rolling dice and setting them into, your classic constitution, strength, dexterity, all of that. And then you get bonuses for the different colored dice going in different places. And when you place in a particular attributes, there's a extra action that you can do. And so it was a super fun, it looked like about an hour game as well. But it was also just fun to get out and find a new group of players and be in a different part of town. So and I love gaming for doing that, right? Like you can sit down across the table with 3 relative strangers, and by the end you're like, aha, this was super fun. It was great to be with all of you people and tell this story, even if the story isn't, an RPG story where you're crafting the narrative in a far more sort of novelistic way,
Mhm.
you still have this narrative of the evening you've spent together and the way that this game happened. And you can go back and say, oh, I loved when you got that, or you screwed me out of a die that I needed, but I managed to bounce back anyway, or that kind of stuff. So it was super fun. And I just love that about gaming.
Okay.
Awesome. Christina, what's on your table?
Well, I must admit I'm not as much of a board gamer as you guys. So, but I
No
did buy
worries.
this Mice and Mystics, and I've been trying to get
Oh,
a group
yeah.
together to play it. So, if you guys want to play it one day, so the last board game I played, we had a gathering at a friend's house where that's all we played was board games. So I'm mostly in role play.
Yep.
Like role players, but it was Zonk. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's gorgeous.
Yep.
With the Egyptian god miniatures and stuff. So I found it fascinating. I actually want to get a copy for myself. I didn't do very well in the game, I must admit that.
I came in last in role player, so that's
okay. Yeah, I think I was probably last in but I was just fascinated with it at the same time. So yeah, I'm gonna hit up Rob at some point and say, hey, I want to buy a copy of that. But I'm having more and more problems getting groups together since COVID hit. So that's one of the reasons that that Joe met me at the game store painting, because I decided, well, if I can't get any people together to actually game, maybe I can get somebody together to paint. So my newest thing is painting miniatures. Yeah, I'm just kind of obsessed with that.
And it came at a perfect time because I'm trying to figure out how to do it again. So being able to work with people and hang out on a Saturday. And of course, Christine let me know that Tuna is going to be there this coming Saturday to do the demo that he had planned to do, but I can't remember if the weather got him or something got him.
No, he got a flu shot and got sick from it.
That's what it was. That's what it was.
So he
said, it sucks to be old people.
This. Oh, I know.
I'm saying that for me.
Yeah.
Not Tuna.
Yeah, I'm dreading getting one myself. I have to do it on a weekend because I know how I'm going to be afterwards.
That's fair. That's fair.
But well, I do hope to see you that Saturday.
Yeah, I'm planning on getting out there for sure.
Yeah.
But before we go, it's interesting. James and I talk about this all the time. Every game store has its own personality. Mm-hmm. And being down at the beach this week, I went into Myrtle Beach Games in Sacasty, South Carolina.
Okay. Yeah, I might have been there. Yeah.
Real fancy way of saying Myrtle Beach. And I walked, and it was a beautiful store. It was very unassuming from outside, as they often are. You go in, and it was much larger on the inside than it appeared to be. Great board game selection. Mm-hmm. A back section that was nothing but minis and miniatures, and then a big table section. And so we got to talk to some of the people that worked there, and they basically, how some stores are like a Magic store, or some stores are like a Warhammer store. They are a Song of Ice and Fire store.
Oh, really? Interesting.
That is their big mini game, and that's why they had just gotten in a new set of one of the ones that's evidently hard to find. I don't play the game, so it didn't really speak to me. He was hoping I was going to buy some. I didn't. While we were there, though, about 3 young people came in and bought Magic cards. Like, hey, buddy, you got the stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it was very much that.
Yeah.
But it was interesting too, because while we were in there, we heard them call Cape Fear Games in Wilmington to do a swap about something, and I love that aspect of the thing, of the industry, in the sense that it is truly a friendly local game store. But what was just surprising to me was how there was the lack of Warhammer, and in its place was Song of Ice and Fire, because it was just and you're only 3 hours away. Or although my wife and I discovered that you can now use dollar generals as a unit of measure. For example, there are $15 generals between Charlotte and Myrtle Beach.
I believe that.
So
I believe that.
But anyway, it was just really interesting to see that what's different down there. So anyway, it's just an observation. I don't know if it holds up. I'll have to go to other stores.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been down that way. But one of my other things I like to do is the visit game store. So I used to post different game stores on my Facebook page. So I'd do a Charleston day, or I'd go to Spartanburg, Greenville, just check out everything out that way. So that's something I really like doing. I also went through the Charlotte direction one time, out the Mighty Meeple's store and
Yep.
all that, because it's
Sure.
kind of out of my way. But yeah, I just find that fascinating because each store's does have its own personality. So it's interesting what you will find there. But one of my favorite game stores is in Oklahoma City. It's Games HQ, because as I say, I'm mostly a role playing gamer. And they just have a huge selections of RPGs by all the companies, Pinnacle and not just Pathfinder and D&D, but just other companies out there. And I really like to see them to get their share. And I also have to give a shout out to the Green Dragon in Charleston there. So for a South Carolina store, it's not as big as the one in Oklahoma, but they do have a really good selection.
So the one in Oklahoma, the Games HQ, that's in Tulsa?
No, it's in Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City, okay.
Yeah.
And then the Green Dragon in Charleston. I need to check that one out.
Yeah, you do check the Green Dragon out. Now, you might not get out of there too quickly because the gentleman who runs the store loves to talk. He's very friendly.
Christina, you've met me.
Yeah,
no.
I think this guy's got you beat, Joe.
Okay. All right. That's fine.
But yeah, great personality that runs a store. And I've been to some in Goose Creek, I think it was.
That's Goose Creek?
Crick. I'm sorry. I was originally born Yankee, so. I call myself
just like that city south of Spartanburg is called Grr.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like I lived in Sharon, South Carolina at one time, and they said, "Well, we know you're not from here because you said Sharon instead of Sharon."
Yeah.
So I totally get that. But yeah, game stores are fascinating.
Well, I look forward to seeing you at Carolina Tabletop Games next Saturday for painting at 1:00 with Tuna, where we're going to get to see that technique.
Yes, 1:00 with Tuna.
He was talking about last week, so I look forward to doing that. And James, I'll see you next Saturday too as we resume our
I
Curse
have to hear
of
more
Strahd.
about your class, James.
Yeah. Well, and I had a question about that store in Myrtle Beach, because I would think, like, I'm always interested in game shops that like don't have copies of like Monopoly and chess and all of the sort of stuff that people would wander in and not know anything about a hobby and just go, I need a chess set, right? So I was expecting like there to be like touristy kind of Myrtle Beachopoly or sets of drinking games or like kids entertainment games, but they were just hardcore gaming.
They did have a shelf. I'm glad you brought that up. They did have a shelf that included Monopoly and Clue and Risk, but they were all themed based, like Game of Thrones Risk, Critical Role Clue. They were not straight up games. It was the first time I'd ever seen a copy of Monopoly in a game store. But maybe I'm just not going to enough game stores, but what was also interesting was to see what they had in stock. They had things in stock that I don't typically see in other game stores.
Right.
And I don't know if that was just because of clientele or because the things that we typically see just sell so darn fast. My wife has been interested in a copy of Pandemic Fall of Rome, and they had it there on the shelf.
Oh, wow.
Which we haven't typically seen that particular one in other places. And so it was just, sort of the way that they had it laid out. The one thing that was interesting that we noted is there were no price tags on the games.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And I asked the guy about it. He goes, well, we want you to come up and talk to us about the games. And I'm like,
sneaky.
So basically you're going to tell me it's $50 and I'm going to say, oh, that's too much. And I put it back. And you're giving me the embarrassment of having to ask you. No, but it was just really fun to kind of see how they were laid. And like I said, it was a neat store. I liked the way it was laid out. It was just, like I said, the diversity of their crowd, the similarities and the differences. That's what I generally try to look for, is like, okay, who's in here? What's their big draw? Right. And I would have, and the thing I like about Carolina Tabletop Games is that I would say there's not one draw, there's multiple draws.
Yeah.
True.
And that's one of the things I think is so great about that store. Other stores, I see a little bit different play on that. It's just the way they evolve. I mean, that's all there is to it. And so And if I'm honest with myself, the store that I frequent pre-COVID versus post-COVID is very different. People who used to work there don't work there anymore. They've moved on to another point in their lives. This was just a stopping point along the way. I mean,
Sure.
we play with Shane. Shane's one of those people. She doesn't work there anymore.
Mhm.
Although she is technically still considered a manager and can allegedly ban me. Um,
So I've heard. Yes.
yes. But it's there's more magic there now than there was when we first discovered the store. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Mhm.
But anyway, it's just interesting to see how these things evolve, and I certainly enjoy it. And so yeah, I don't know.
Well, I used to do a lot of traveling for my job, and I would always go and find the local game shop because it always takes you away from whatever conference center you're in, and it also is generally away from the tourist district of whatever city you're in.
Right.
Yeah, and so you get into this kind of little neighborhood, and it's a fun and funky little place to go. And for a while, and I haven't seen it recently too much, but there would be stores that had like, I guess the city would have a pretty vibrant indie RPG scene. And
Mhm.
so there would be these little, almost like chapbook sized RPGs that would be on the shelf. And
Oh,
it was kind of fun to get these little regional games and see what people were doing and how they were thinking about these kind of basically one shot sort of adventure and rule sets. It was
mm.
interesting. Yeah, super fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I had to when I went out to South Dakota. I managed to find, I think it was a comic book store and a game store out, I think in
Yep.
Cedar Rapids, and stopped there. And I'm like, and I got to make some friends out in this area so I can visit. It's beautiful territory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Christina, thank you so much for being our guest this week on Lay It on the Table.
Yes.
I certainly enjoyed learning a little
I
bit
did.
more about how you've evolved in your career, and I look forward to getting to know you more as a gamer and a friend, and hopefully we'll get James up here one day from his hidey hole in Greenville, and
Yeah,
Yes, you
figure
must
all
come
that
this
out.
way.
Yes,
I know.
it must happen. But and then of course, James, look forward to just catching up with you later on next week. So
Yes.
again, this is another episode of Lay It on the Table. I am Joe Mahaffey. I am not bored. I am bored gaming.
And I'm James Engelhart, and I'm hoping that all your tiebreakers break your way.
See you next time, folks.